The first qualifying session of the 2025 season is done and dusted, and there have been quite a lot of talking stories ahead of the race on Sunday, with two drivers of the top four teams being out in Q1, McLaren locking the front row and Ferrari fumbling a big advantage. The qualifying was everything we could have expected, but which team stands where after the first competitive session in Australia, and what should we expect from tomorrow's race? There is no doubt that the qualifying session in Australia has been one of the most highly anticipated events because of the long wait of 3 months without racing, and from the very first qualifying session we've seen big surprises. After Behrman's gearbox failed, it was obvious that there would be a de facto 4 drivers who would get out of Q1 on pure merit, and seeing Antonelli and Lawson there was definitely not in our plans for Saturday. Mercedes has shown a very strong pace throughout the entirety of the weekend, and seeing Antonelli being kicked out of Q1 was painful for the Mercedes fans. Nevertheless, it was truly something that he couldn't have done anything about. After running wide in turn 4, Antonelli suffered damage on his floor, which cost him a lot of lap time in the last 2 tries. Even with such damage, Antonelli managed to keep the car at P15 for a longer period of time before being kicked out by Bortoleto, the driver who out-qualified his teammate as a rookie and who was graded as a Tier B driver by Marco. To add salt to the wound, the other driver who got out-qualified by Bortoleto is Lawson, the protege of Red Bull and one of Marco's choices to race in Red Bull on a long-term basis. This is the story that shocked everyone because Lawson was struggling throughout the entirety of the weekend, and the culmination arrived on Saturday's qualifying session. The Kiwi driver went wide on many occasions, but on the last lap he lost the balance in the last combination of corners and went wide into the grass. His reaction was that he had lost the tyres for the last try to make it out of Q1, but the gap to Verstappen is massive, and this is not what he's been brought for in the team. When talking about the frustrating end of Saturday's session, Lawson said, "We expected the start of the qualification to be tough. To be honest, the first laps were expected to be off, and then we were just planning on building through session. But obviously going off that on the second lap put everything out of order a bit. And then the last lap was good, honestly, just the last sector where I had a big drop, so yeah, missing P3 obviously doesn't help any of this, but I shouldn't be going off in quali. So before turn 9 we were about half a second up. I'd already had a snap at turns 9 and 10. I think tyres were already starting to drop there, so that is something that we've been battling this weekend and something that we missed practicing in P3. There is something about Lawson that puts him in a very difficult position ahead of the 2025 season, primarily because the situation between him and Tsunoda regarding the promotion to Red Bull hasn't looked very transparent. This is the 7th consecutive weekend in which he's been outperformed by the Japanese driver, who, by the way, will start tomorrow's race at P5 and is the closest driver to Verstappen from the entire Red Bull family. And although the margins in the first 6 races were slow, this could easily turn into something that would ruin Lawson's career. The goal for the Kiwi driver was to be 0.3 of a second close to Verstappen in order to have 2 cars fighting for the Constructors' Championship, and his mission started extremely poor. Unfortunately, he and Antonelli were not the only disappointments throughout the qualifying in Australia. Both Ferrari drivers would have to satisfy themselves with P7 and P8 after being outperformed by a Williams and a Racing Bull car, and although the weather tomorrow will play a huge role in the race's outcome, there is no doubt that Ferrari is starting on the back foot. Throughout the entire weekend it looked like P2 was a realistic goal for them, and with a superb lap and a bit of luck they could have maybe snatched P1 as well. However, the 4th row start from the Maranello team was definitely not written in the stars, especially now that they have the duo of McLaren locking the front row and starting the season in a very dominant fashion. Many have started to believe that the setup of the SF25 is more oriented towards tomorrow's race, which again should be under wet circumstances, but Hamilton is not sure in the team's direction regarding this manner. When talking about whether or not the car has been set up for tomorrow's vastly different circumstances compared to today, the 7-time world champion added, "Regarding the qualifying, I generally feel good. I had a really good time out there. Everything has been a first this weekend. My first P1 with Ferrari, my first practice sessions in qualifying, and it has been a lot of work to really adapt to this car that is so much different here to what I've experienced in the past. But it has been interesting. I mean, I definitely don't expect us to be here. I didn't know that we would be 9/10 off or therefore 8/10 off today, but there is a lot to dissect for sure. We'll just get our heads down and start working to try and find out why we are not on pace with the front runners. Tomorrow is going to be a challenge. I've never driven this car in the rain. I don't even know the rain settings, so I've got to go and study that tonight, and it will be a learning experience again tomorrow. The encouraging fact for the Ferrari fans as well as the Hamilton ones is that the gap between him and Leclerc is not as big as originally projected. At one point it was just at 1/10 of a second, but it varied around the 3/10 of a second mark. This is a huge improvement for the Brits, who can only get better from this point and start to apply pressure to Leclerc. However, if they are fighting for P6, then it's not the goal that Vasseur had in mind when he signed such a great driver to his team. But on the other hand, the verdict from Leclerc was far more damning, and when talking about the qualifying performance of Ferrari, the Monegasque driver said, "Ever since this morning, the performance wasn't the same as yesterday. I think I know where it comes from, but we have to analyse the data. Unfortunately, we did the right thing for the weekend. We had to lose a bit of performance, and I won't go into details. 7 and 8 is disappointing. I wouldn't have imagined this even in the worst scenario." A squad that is not being talked about enough is Williams, as the Grove-based squad managed to get both of their cars in the top 10 for the first time in Australia in 10 years. There is no doubt that Williams' initial pace in Bahrain and the strong showing throughout the practice sessions in Australia were not a fluke, because apart from McLaren and Ferrari, they are the only team to have 2 cars in Q3, which is a massive statement from a team that was expected to fight maximum for P6. Now, the P5 goal is a realistic one as well, because if they can continue with this strong form, it could result in a string of constant point-scoring races, which is exactly why they brought Sainz alongside Albon. Even though it was the Thai driver who managed to get ahead of both Ferrari drivers and qualify at P6, Sainz will have a very good starting position by himself, P10. Therefore, we should be looking at a very interesting start of the race, because there should be a total chaos at turn 1 in such circumstances, especially with drivers like Leclerc and Hamilton having a lot to lose throughout the weekend. Another strong story is the domination of McLaren, as well as Verstappen's strong showing and putting the car on the second row, especially after his statements that the car is not going to be competitive for the win. But a P3 start for a man who has been dominating races in wet conditions is something that can be considered as a pole position start from many fans in the world, and this is exactly what Marco is banking on happening tomorrow. The max factor is going to be the greatest thing to look out for, and both of the McLaren drivers will be put on a test as to whether or not they can win with the most dominant car on the grid. The intra-team battle between Piastri and Norris is going to put a lot of things into perspective, and it will be very interesting to see how Zak Brown will handle the team orders in order to capitalise the absolute maximum from both cars tomorrow. Piastri was adamant that he won't yield under pressure and he won't play the team game now that everything starts from zero. So the race tomorrow is going to be everything that we hope for a very long time. Competitive under wet conditions. With all this in mind, what are your takeaways from the first qualifying session of the season, and more importantly, what are your expectations for the race tomorrow? Let us know in the comments below, and once you do that, have a look at the video that's appearing on your screen right now.